All right, so now we move on to the part of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Now, this is extremely interesting, and what I'm going to say here is a teeny tiny little brief history of the area. We'll talk about it a lot more in 11th grade, and I encourage you to read more about this if you're interested. Afghanistan has a very unique history. It's this cultural crossroads. The Silk Road went through it, so Asians and Europeans and everybody were crossing through Afghanistan. And it's got this really unique mixed culture. And at least 15 different ethnic groups live there, and many different religions. And so historically, it's been a really hard area for one empire to control. A few have tried, but usually it ends up failing because there's so many mountains and valleys and different kinds of people, and nobody can agree. But in the 1960s and 70s, they had a pretty decent life. And then in the 1980s, the Soviet Union invaded, and they wanted to take over because there are some nice natural gas reserves there. And so Afghanistan then became this Cold War spot, this big tension spot. And the United States did not want the Soviet Union to take Afghanistan. We were doing anything in our power to stop the Cold War and the spread of communism, except for actually fighting the Soviet Union ourselves. So what did we do? Well, there's a senator from Texas named Charlie Wilson. He saw what was going on. He wanted to stop communism. So he encouraged the Senate to send some military aid over to Afghanistan to arm their own people. We couldn't be fighting the Soviet Union directly because that could have been nuclear holocaust. So we gave their people, who happened to be the Mujahideen, who later become the Taliban, we gave them money and trucks and weapons and training, and through the CIA helped them fight against the Soviet Union. And it worked. And by the time the Soviet Union were defeated, this picture here is of the Soviet troops leaving Afghanistan. They left, and people in America, maybe if they were paying attention to the news, kind of saw a little blip about it. And everybody's like, okay, yay, we're done. Let's spend money on our own country. Who cares about them? And we pulled all of our funding from Afghanistan, and we did not help them rebuild their country. Now, Charlie Wilson, who actually has a movie called Charlie Wilson's War about his story, he kept trying to ask for people to go back and rebuild this country because he knew that if we just leave them war-torn and we let this one group that has all the weapons take over and make the decisions, that's not going to be good. But the American public had already moved on, and they didn't really care or even know about it that much. So America pulled out, and they were left to fix their country on their own. Well, the Taliban took over that. Mujahideen, they called themselves the Taliban, and they were extremists. They're Muslims, but they only told people what they wanted them to believe, and they kind of made up their own fundamental rules. They took some rules from the Quran, and then they made them extreme. All of a sudden, women couldn't be doctors or lawyers or even really work outside of the home. Women had to be covered head to toe in a burqa. And this is a country where women had been doctors and senators and things for years. And they took all of that away. Girls are no longer allowed to go to school. They stopped playing music and movies. They outlawed pretty much everything. And it was just crazy, fundamental Sharia law. Sharia law, remember, is where your government law is the same as your religious law. And they took over, and they completely changed this country for the worse. Well, they also started training some terrorists. They opened their arms to these Al-Qaeda people. And Al-Qaeda set up these little schools throughout the countryside where they were training terrorists. And these people couldn't read, they couldn't write, so all they knew was what these Al-Qaeda terrorist leaders were telling them. And all they believed is what their religious leaders told them, because that's all they knew. They didn't know how to read or write anymore. And so this became like a breeding ground for terrorists. Now, bin Laden, he was a wealthy Saudi Arabian guy. He went over there, and he helped fund a lot of it because he had a lot of oil money and money from his dad's businesses, I think, in construction, to help fund these schools. And they created some terrorists. They'd done bombings all over the world before at U.S. embassies. In 1993, they even did a van bomb at the World Trade Center. It wasn't huge, but, I mean, it caught most people's attention. But, I'm sure people in rural Minnesota saw it and was like, oh, okay, that was in New York, doesn't affect me. But they did start bombing a lot in Africa and our embassies all over the world in the late 1990s. And then we get to September 11th, 2001. Al-Qaeda, who had been training in Afghanistan because the Taliban let them, had paid off a bunch of Saudi families so that their sons became suicide bombers in American aircraft, and they flew into the World Trade Center. They were going to try to hit the Pentagon and Congress, and we all kind of know how that went. So this all leads back to that history of us, the United States, supporting the Taliban and paying them to fight against the Soviet Union. And we didn't do anything to help them rebuild, so those people took over, and look where it got us. Well, the United States ended up attacking them in 2002. We still have troops there today because we were there for a while. We thought we got it under control, and we realized we didn't. Their new president is Hamid Karzai, and he's attempting to rule Afghanistan as a democracy, but like I said in the beginning, there's 15 different types of ethnic groups there, and everybody has a different opinion on how to run this. And there's still Taliban people running around in the mountains and hiding and launching attacks. And you know what? People are scared to death of them. And so it's super easy for the Taliban to take over. We really have our work cut out for us. This is not an easy situation. My little 6-minute explanation, it just barely covers this. So please look into this a lot more.